Welcome guys to the Coin Riches channel. Before we begin, if you appreciate thoughtful conversations about history, legacy, and the hidden stories inside everyday objects, take a quiet moment to subscribe and press like, because what we explore here is not just about coins, it is about memory, time, and the value we often overlook in plain sight. There is something almost poetic about the 1972 United States Roosevelt Dime. It is small, modest, easily forgotten in a jar of loose change, yet it carries within it a story that stretches across generations. For many of you watching, this coin was minted during a time you personally remember. The early 70s were not distant textbook history. They were lived years. They were years of transition, uncertainty, resilience, and quiet determination. And resting in the palm of your hand, this small 10-cent piece reflects that era with surprising depth. When the 1972 Roosevelt Dime was struck, America was navigating social shifts, economic pressures, and global challenges. Yet the coin itself remained steady, consistent, and dignified. The familiar profile of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt faces left, calm and composed. His presence on the dime was never accidental. Roosevelt's leadership during the Great Depression and the Second World War left an imprint so profound that placing him on the nation's smallest circulating silver coin in 1946 felt symbolic. By 1972, that symbolism had matured. It was no longer fresh. It was embedded in tradition. Look closely at a 1972 dime and you will notice its simplicity. There is no dramatic flourish, no oversized lettering demanding attention. The portrait is balanced. The inscriptions are deliberate. Liberty curves gently along the edge. In God we trust sits with quiet authority. The date, 1972, marks a specific year, yet it also serves as a gateway to memory. Some of you may recall buying gasoline for well under $1 a gallon. Others may remember saving dimes in a glass jar for a weekend treat or a telephone call from a payphone. This coin was not exotic. It was useful. And usefulness often becomes invisible over time. What makes the 1972 Roosevelt Dime particularly fascinating is not just its design, but its composition and context. By this point in history, the United States had already moved away from traditional silver coinage. The Coinage Act of 1965 had replaced silver in dimes with a copper core layered in nickel. The 1972 dime, therefore, represents a post-silver era reality. It carries the appearance of silver but not its intrinsic metal value. For many collectors, this shift marked the beginning of modern coinage, where rarity and condition would matter more than precious metal content. Millions of these dimes were produced at the Philadelphia and Denver mints. On the surface, that fact alone might suggest there is nothing extraordinary here. After all, how can something produced in such large numbers hold deeper importance? But seasoned collectors understand that rarity is not always about mintage totals. It is about survival, condition, and subtle variations that separate the ordinary from the exceptional. Over the decades, most 1972 dimes lived hard lives. They passed through vending machines, cash registers, pockets, and bank rolls. They endured scratches, friction, contact marks, and environmental exposure. Brilliant surfaces dulled. Crisp details softened. What remains today in truly pristine condition is far less common than original production numbers would suggest. A sharply struck 1972 dime with full torch bands on the reverse, minimal contact marks, and original mint luster becomes something entirely different from the worn examples still hiding in circulation. The reverse design itself deserves reflection. The torch at the center symbolizes liberty. The olive branch speaks to peace. The oak branch stands for strength and independence. These are not random decorations. They are ideals carefully chosen during a time when the nation sought stability. By 1972, these symbols had become quietly familiar, yet they still carried meaning. In a decade marked by both tension and transformation, the imagery on this dime felt steady and reassuring. For collectors between the ages of 35 and 65 and beyond, there is an added layer of connection. This coin may have been part of your childhood allowance, your first job's change, or the contents of your father's coin tray. It may have been handed to you by a grandparent without either of you realizing that one day it would be examined under magnification by someone searching for microscopic details that define value, and here is where the story deepens. Within the 1972 Roosevelt Dime series, subtle variations in strike quality and mint state grading can create dramatic differences in desirability. A coin graded at the highest levels, preserved with exceptional clarity and brilliance, becomes more than spare change. It becomes a survivor. It becomes a time capsule. It becomes evidence that sometimes, against all odds, something ordinary remains untouched by the wear of decades. Collectors who understand this do not chase hype. They pursue condition. They examine the sharpness of Roosevelt's hair, the separation of the torch bands, the cleanliness of the fields. They look for coins that appear as though they were struck yesterday, frozen in the year 1972. When you study coins long enough, you begin to understand that value is rarely loud. It does not shout from the surface. It whispers through detail. The 1972 Roosevelt Dime rewards patience in exactly that way. Under magnification, what appears at first glance to be a simple 10-cent piece begins to reveal layers of craftsmanship and subtle complexity. The sculptor's careful rendering of Roosevelt's jawline, the texture of his hair, the spacing of the lettering, even the alignment of the mint mark when present, all become part of a larger story. The Philadelphia Mint produced 1972 dimes without a mint mark, while the Denver Mint added a small d just above the date. To the untrained eye, this distinction may seem minor. To collectors, it matters. Not because one mint drastically outperformed the other in total numbers, but because strike quality, die wear, and preservation patterns varied. Some Denver strikes are known for slightly stronger detail, while certain Philadelphia examples exhibit softer features. These nuances create opportunities for discovery, and then there is the matter of full torch bands. On the reverse of the Roosevelt Dime, the torch is bound by two horizontal bands. When those bands are sharply defined and fully separated, the coin earns what collectors call a full bands designation at the highest grading tiers. This detail is not guaranteed. It requires a combination of fresh dies, precise striking pressure, and fortunate preservation. Many 1972 dimes left the mint without perfectly defined bands. Many more lost sharpness through circulation. A coin that retains full bands decades later stands apart. As we move deeper into this conversation, it is important to recognize the emotional dimension of condition. Those of you who grew up in the 70s understand how easily coins were handled. They were tossed onto kitchen counters, stored loosely in drawers, mixed with keys and paperclips. The idea that a small dime from 1972 could remain virtually untouched for over half a century seems almost improbable. And yet, improbability is often the foundation of rarity. There are stories of collectors who set aside rolls of dimes directly from banks in the early 70s, never opening them, never disturbing them. Over time, those rolls became miniature vaults of potential. When such coins are finally examined and professionally graded, the difference between an average mint state coin and an exceptional one becomes clear. Luster plays across the surface like light on water. The fields appear smooth and reflective. Contact marks are minimal or absent. The design elements rise sharply from the background, as if newly struck, but beyond physical condition, the 1972 Roosevelt Dime also carries historical resonance. This was the era following the end of the silver standard in circulating coinage. Americans were still adjusting to the idea that their coins no longer contained precious metal in the way earlier generations had known. Trust in the currency was rooted less in intrinsic material and more in national stability. The dime, small and unassuming, symbolized that transition. It represented continuity during a time of monetary evolution. For mature collectors, especially those between 35 and 65 and beyond, the appeal is layered. There is nostalgia, certainly. There is also the intellectual satisfaction of understanding how macroeconomic shifts influence something as small as a 10-cent piece. When you hold a 1972 dime, you are holding a product of policy decisions, industrial processes, and artistic tradition converging in a single object. Now let us consider the grading scale, because this is where the conversation turns from appreciation to valuation. Coins are assessed on a numerical scale that ranges from heavily worn to flawless mint state perfection. The higher the grade, the scarcer the coin becomes in that condition. A circulated 1972 dime might be worth exactly 10 cents, perhaps slightly more to a beginner collector assembling a date set. But as the grade climbs into the upper mint state levels, the field narrows dramatically to in the highest certified tiers, only a small fraction of surviving 1972 dimes qualify. These coins exhibit near-perfect surfaces, strong strikes, and full torch bands. They are the elite examples. They are the coins that survived untouched while countless others bore the scars of daily commerce. And when one of these extraordinary pieces appears, it commands attention from serious collectors who understand what they are seeing. It is easy to dismiss modern clad coinage as common. That assumption has cost many people opportunities. The truth is that condition rarity can elevate even a widely produced coin into a prized collectible. The market does not reward age alone. It rewards preservation. It rewards scarcity within grade. It rewards the unlikely survival of perfection. Imagine for a moment a 1972 dime struck with exceptional clarity, stored carefully from the day it was minted, protected from contact, humidity, and mishandling. Decades pass. The coin remains brilliant, its surfaces nearly flawless. When finally submitted for professional evaluation, it receives one of the highest possible grades. At that point, it is no longer simply a 1972 dime. It becomes one of the finest known examples in existence. Collectors compete for such coins not out of impulse, but out of recognition. They understand population reports. They understand how few examples achieve top designations. They understand that once secured in a long-term collection, these coins rarely return to the market quickly. Scarcity compounds over time, and so we arrive at the moment that transforms curiosity into realization. Among the countless 1972 Roosevelt dimes struck for everyday use, there exists a specimen so impeccably preserved, so sharply detailed, so remarkably untouched by time, that it achieved a valuation far beyond what most would ever imagine for a 10-cent coin. This is not about speculation. It is about documented condition rarity at the highest level. It is about a coin that embodies survival against probability. It is about the intersection of history, craftsmanship, and preservation converging in one small disc of metal. When that exceptional 1972 Roosevelt dime was evaluated and recognized for its extraordinary state, its value rose accordingly. Not to hundreds. Not to thousands in modest increments. But to a figure that forces even seasoned collectors to pause. The valuation reached an astonishing $55,000, yes, $55,000 for a coin that once circulated as 10 cents, that number is not magic. It is the logical outcome of rarity within grade, sustained demand from serious collectors, and the undeniable appeal of owning one of the finest surviving examples of a coin that millions once carried casually in their pockets. So the next time you encounter a 1972 Roosevelt dime, do not dismiss it as ordinary. Look closely. Examine the details. Consider the possibility that within the most familiar objects of daily life, extraordinary value can quietly exist. Because in at least one remarkable case, that small and humble coin proved to be worth $55,000.